So I'm Chet Faliszek. I'm co-founder of Bombay company. If you aren't familiar with me in that role, I was at Valve for 12 years, where I was project lead on the Left 4 Dead series, as well as writer on various franchises, including Half-Life, Team Fortress, and Portal. And in my final 3 years at Valve, I worked with outside developers for launch content for the HTC Vive and Steam VR. And I mentioned those final 3 years because it was during that time that I got to visit development studios around the world. It was really cool. I got to see giant studios in the West to a team squatting in an apartment in Kiev. And during that time, I'd ask everybody different, just simple questions about culture and process. And those would end up being long discussions about developer happiness, compensation, and just really long-term satisfaction. So much of what we'll cover here really comes from those discussions and then further discussions I had once I decided to start my own studio. So the purpose of this talk is to stop developers from hurting themselves. But of course, it has a bias. These were conversations based on me trying to address problems that I had had in the industry. And then over time, talking with a lot of people, learning that there's a lot of universal problems that kept being repeated across studios. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that developers have issues right now, that we need to change the way we make games, and this isn't just about crunch. So I think you have to change from the ground up how you make games. A game studio, and I think games is less about the software and more about the culture and process. And not everyone's had these problems. I haven't had all these problems myself. There are some universal things that I kept seeing repeated. As developers, we're really smart about how we make games. We understand that little things give players clues for how they're going to then interpret and change how they behave because of the clues we give them. So look at the opening of Gone Home, right? It's a setting and scene, you're returning home from a trip, and look how much it changes if we put the typical FPS crosshair in it. So we're not going to do that, right? Because that's going to change our expectations about that game. So that's what I'm asking you here to do today, right? For us to step back and think about the things we do in the studio that have long-term impact on that studio's culture. And lastly, before we begin, I hate being prescriptive in saying do this and don't do that, but the talk just kind of works better that way, so just take it in that nature. All right, so there's been a bunch of talk recently about the struggles on the making of the game Anthem. I think we can all agree that you can learn a bunch of what not to do based on how they made that game. And and it's not a knock, making games is hard. There's a bunch of stuff that only becomes really evident in hindsight, and that's a good example. But Anthem is, if you look at it now, isn't a game design problem, but it's a culture and process problem. And company culture is harder to fix than software. So I don't think anyone reading that Kotaku article is thinking, hey, that's how I'm going to make my next game yet. Most developers, when they start a new studio, first thing they do is install software from a company that didn't fail once at making a game, but twice. So Stuart Butterfield made Slack. He's a super smart dude, but twice he started a game company, and both times he got distracted and made another product instead. I mean, that's awesome for him, but it may be that he just fundamentally is bad at understanding how people work to make games. And while maybe Slack's a great tool for noisy, high-contact, interactive offices, it might not be so great for a studio where you want to let people have deep thought and keep on task not for just minutes, but for hours and days. Actually, excuse me, in the back, can you make the current slide smaller?
Yeah.
Sorry, just one sec. No, because I was getting my big punchline. Whoop. Sorry. No, I actually don't see any notes now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Changing it here when you can't see it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Is that better?
If you could just drag it over even a little bit more.
That's unfortunate.
And it's not connected to the slide now. Sorry. All right, so we'll first delete Slack. Seriously, I know I said it wouldn't be prescriptive, but this is the one time I'm going to be. So you'll be much better off deleting Slack. Again, I don't have notes. So. All right, there we go. Yes, we're good. Thank you. So I'm not joking, try it. So if I posted a suggestion online, yeah, that was a lot of weight for that, wasn't it? It was worth it, though. It was worth it. But so often when I posted this online, I get 3 responses, general responses back. 1, it's needed where I work. Sure, I'm talking about a game studio where you need deep thought and flow. If you work at a call center and it's noisy and you're being interrupted all the time, fair enough. 2, I put it on Do Not Disturb. Well, you have those partial conversations already going, you have those messages you have to come back to, those are weighing on you. Or 3, you work remotely. And I get that you're trying to kind of replicate those little conversations that happen inside the office, but the problem is you have none of those social cues that come with that when you're in the office. So what will often happen is the person who's remote actually posts more messages because they're trying to show that they're active and working, and the other people don't have those social norms of being like, hey dude, I'm trying to start to do some work, so can you stop? So seriously, try it. It takes you 40 minutes to get in the flow and only seconds to break it. So a tool that helps our efficiency should be something that we use less, not more. Slack hasn't lessened our communication or replaced email. It's just added more communication. And it sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes you actually want to add friction to communication. By lowering that friction, Slack hasn't made communication better. It just made more of it at lower quality. So I consider developers' deep thinking and valuable time the most valuable, deep thinking the most valuable thing we have in our office. And yet, not just Slack, but most of our technology and the way we work breaks that. So a quick check to see if you have a problem here. Do your programmers schedule time for them to work? Right? They just do a whole little meeting blocks and say that they're working. And that's because they're trying to avoid distraction. So often meetings in a busy environment is something that happens. But a few meeting tips. First of all, don't let Outlook decide your length of your meeting. Meetings can be shorter than 30 minutes. They can be shorter than 15 minutes. Also, I know some people who just do every meeting like a stand-up, always standing up so that it never slows down. And meetings are great at identifying problems, but they're not good at solving problems. When you try to be prescriptive inside a meeting is when you end up with those all-day meetings, so try to avoid that. It's one reason why I think flat companies work really well, because there isn't a hierarchy to solving problems. You want the person closest to the problem, the one with the most information solving the problem, and calling in other people to help solve it. But one of the problems you'll see, especially when dealing with young people on your staff, is you can't empower somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So you can't just throw somebody into a flat structure. Working flat has to start from day 0 or acknowledge that it needs to be a reset to move to that method. And the 2 biggest misnomers about a flat company: 1, that you have no manager. The opposite's actually true. Everybody's your manager. And 2, that you can't have somebody who's acting as a lead that's helping give focus and sharpness to that process. You can, and that's how it actually works best. And then once you're doing it that way, the best way that works is the loop for flat styles: idea generation, prototyping, testing, and observation. So if you read the book Design of Everyday Things, it's the biggest takeaway from there. I mean, it's a pretty common way to work in the game industry, but one of the things that I think people often get wrong is observed playtests. Observed playtests aren't for finding bugs, they're for finding design. If you're just looking for bugs, all you're gonna do is constantly fix symptoms and not the causes. So you wanna watch what the players are really doing. All right. If you're hiring those fresh young candidates, not only do you have to work differently, you have to mentor them. Stop hiring young people because they're just cheap and throwing them to the wolves, right? Teach them how to approach the work and mentor them. Otherwise, you're not helping them get their foot in the door, but you're actually breaking them. I see this consistently with a few developers where we'll get candidates from them, and they're not hireable. They've been broken by not being mentored. And everyone working on the game should play the game. It sounds obvious, and everyone acts like they do it, but they don't. And it's actually one reason not to have an internal QA department. I often see small devs will have a QA department and push off the playing of the game on them instead of them playing it themselves. And that equally then creates this bad class structure where you have the QA department and the dev team. So if you're going to have internal QA, at least make them sure they're part of the team. And it also helps with everybody. Avoid making classes of employees. So I get the need for titles externally, but internally get rid of them. Words like junior and senior create these power dynamics that are unhelpful. And to go even further than that, when I was setting up the new studio, I had someone say we should hire an office manager. The reason being, well, what if someone makes a mess in the bathroom? You don't want to clean it up. They're right, I don't. So that almost sounds reasonable. But really, the real problem is we should fix the culture where we don't have that mess, right? We should have people be responsible to themselves. So once you create a class of employees, you're going to constantly be dealing with issues that arise from those conflict between those classes. And a lot of these issues are similar to that. Find the core problem and address it. Be honest with yourself and fix the company problem. Don't band-aid the solution. So I've heard companies not sending people to GDC because they're worried about being poached. That's not a problem with GDC. That's a problem with the culture at your company. And so culture problems can often fester because people are busy working, making a game. I get it, right? So you need to lift your head up and see what's happening. I don't think anyone's ever started a company and said, hey man, we want bro culture where we make women and unrepresented minorities feel uncomfortable. But yet it happens all the time. So to help prevent that, you can hire an outsourced HR person. It's easy these days. There's so many services that can do it. They can come in a couple hours a day or a couple hours a month and just take the temperature of the studio. And they can be what HR is supposed to be, and that's advocates for the employees. So it's going to cost you a few $100 and maybe some awkward conversations, but it'll help you make sure to be honest about your culture and work conditions. If you think a few $100 a month is expensive, it pales in comparison to the cost of hiring a new engineer because that engineer quit because they were uncomfortable. So all this I'm saying today is not just to be a decent human being or to care about the people you work with, but it actually helps your bottom line and helps you make better games. So while outsourcing HR is great, don't outsource everything to your development team. Don't outsource your social media activity. When you do that too often, you fall into this problem of social media being a goal instead of a tool. Well, what's the difference, right? Your goal is to sell games. And to do that, you may use a tool of Twitter, streaming. Those all may change. They change what's popular and what works the best. But your goal shouldn't. When you make your goal 10,000 Twitter followers, you lost sight of that goal. And so social media posts should come from inside the team. The community loves that authenticity and that interaction with the dev team. If not that, they should at least come with somebody that's really close to the team. Because you're creating something, a game. That game is a language, a tone, and a vibe. Your social media should have that as well. And often when it doesn't, I can tell you that that's the person posting has lost connection and they've decided that the goal is their own popularity. And getting this right also helps you avoid the disconnect between kind of people's expectation of the game. Because otherwise, if you have this dedicated social media person, they're out there posting, hyping people up, and they may overhype what the dev team actually thinks they're going to be delivering. So you want to avoid that. Then when you do have someone from the team doing this, defend your employees. Most of this talks about minimizing the power structure of a studio and making everyone equal, but oddly enough, this is the one time companies are really good at this. All of a sudden when an employee's attacked, maybe they said something stupid. Maybe they just happen to be a woman or an unrepresented minority. You need to defend them. Never offer them up as a sacrifice. As an industry, big and small, we have to get better at this. When you sacrifice an employee, no matter how stupid the thing is they said and how angry the crowd, you're making communication harder for everyone. You're training a feedback loop. It's destroying an avenue of communication, not just for you, but for all of us. So stop it. If someone is posting on social media, how is it that we have the idea of media training, but not social media training? Take the time to devise a company strategy. And a tip, ignore the stupid people. Don't rise them up. Don't show them examples of being horrible people. Just block them and move on. Because otherwise you're also creating this feedback loop where they're just going to do more of it. And a side note on messaging, because it came up back when I was defending review bombing. I wasn't defending review bombing as being a good thing. Okay? It's not helpful. It's not effective. It's just the community felt they had no other way to communicate with the developers, so they chose a way they knew they'd get a response. Because that's how they've been trained. Right? So when I said this, I had someone using the example of Left 4 Dead 2 as boycott, as even a good messaging. The community acted irrational. I'll say this, the announcement of Left 4 Dead 2 was bad messaging. We didn't anticipate the reaction of some members of the community once our DLC was delayed. We never went back and looked at the announcement through that lens. And since I had something to do with that communication, that was my fault. We created the conditions for the outrage, and it was in our hands. If we had been better at communicating what we were doing, we could have controlled that situation better. And the reaction was so bad, they created one of those Hitler videos. Which, can I point out, isn't pissing off the most evil man in the world a good thing? So those videos have always really confused me. All right, now a few random points to close this up. Founder risk is overrated. Everyone at a startup has increased risk. In fact, as one of the founders, there's ways I can mitigate risk that other people can't. So employees should be rewarded for that risk. Too many times founders have looked for a payday on their name, exploiting their employees. So we talked about this internally a bunch, and we created a profit-sharing plan where everyone's rewarded equally, including the founders. And this includes then also not rewarding the developers who have been with you disproportionately large. So I don't know how many times I've heard a version of this story where someone's being told, why are you quitting? Why are you quitting? And the person saying, why are you quitting, is a senior dev who's been there, who's getting a mid-six-figure bonus and probably didn't work that hard that year. And he's telling it to somebody who's only been there a couple years, getting a mid-four-figure bonus and probably worked their ass off. Right? There's just this gulf between the two. But when you're doing all these things I'm talking about, like having no titles, changing compensation, making seniority, not being so influencing, you have to do it from the start so that everyone knows they're joining, what they're joining and signing up for. Everyone is equal. And once everyone's equal, it becomes really clear how to treat people. For instance, you can do this at any time. Ask employees not to install work email on their phones. To encourage that, don't send emails at night or on the weekend. You want everyone to recharge and get strong in their downtime. So we're making games, not curing cancer. You don't need to be on call 24/7. And then be understanding with time off. There is never a good time for a vacation or a sick relative. So encourage time off for both. And if your time off plan doesn't allow it, change your plan. So I've been told of people being out of the office dealing with a personal tragedy, and them being told that they're out of PTO days and they have to go to unpaid leave days. When you're dealing with something bad with your family, is that what you want to hear? No, so don't do it to them. So at Stray Bombay, we actually have unlimited PTO, but we also know that's a trap, since when you do that, often people don't take any days off. So we also have forced 2 weeks of downtime, and we take off all major holidays, the entire studio. And that's something I've seen more and more studios do. I mean, that's something we've got that idea from some other people as well. And be flexible with work from home. So I personally think you make your best games when you're all in the studio together, but sometimes you have to deal with life. So be supportive and make sure you support remote working. Little side note, I've never actually written one line for any game I've worked on in the studio. I've done it all at home or on the road because I talk to myself when I write. And I hear, but people will take advantage of it. Be a leader. Pay attention. If someone's abusing it, is it a real problem or a real problem they're having? Don't penalize everyone because you aren't willing to have an awkward conversation or willing to fire someone who is abusing it. This all goes back to hiring is the most expensive thing you're going to do. And the companies that understand that are normally the most flexible with their employees to keep them happy from not leaving. And companies with the best retention also happen to make some of the best games, because making a good game will make you pretty happy. But to do that, you have to hire the right people for this, and just importantly, not be scared to fire the wrong people. Make culture and process the thing you're shipping at the studio, and great games will follow. Thanks. I think I get it on time.
Thank you very much.
Like
We've got a minute or two if there are questions.
Nope. That's such a good talk. I got it.
You covered every base. That's it. One here. Here we go. Thank you.
You talked about deleting Slack for to increase creativity and interaction for company culture. I was wondering, what do you think about using like messaging apps within companies for under non-creative forms of communication?
Well, so one of the big things is that, and there's been a bunch of studies and talk. Oh yeah, it's indie lifestyle stuff. Stop doing that. No, I'm kidding. There's a bunch of studies, and New York Times had a good article, and there's some others about. So normally when you're in development, it's about flow and keeping the same thought in your head, right? Because when you're trying to fix something, it's like a 2-3 hour process. And so you want to have anything that avoids that. And you want to have the culture where you can let people just go deep and don't think that they have to have this constant kind of interaction with people when you're deep working on something. So it's really anything that allows that. And it works differently for different people. And so I know some studios that actually, I think, use Slack probably in a good way, but they're really militant about it because you want to make sure that you're letting people have those periods where they can just have deep, long thinking where they know they're not going to be interrupted.
Got it. Thank you. Great, thank you very much. Chet, we should probably leave it there, I think, just in terms of keeping things going. But I know you're around here, so people do want to catch you. They can maybe find you outside. But a round of applause for Chet and his insights there.